Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here in the Overflow Room, reporting on Haydn Symphony number 25. That means number 25 in our Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we are almost at 25% because there are actually 107 symphonies or symphonic-like thingies that we're going to be talking about. So, we're really moving. We're getting there. I'm really excited about the fact that we've gotten this far. And Symphony number 25 has taken me a long time to figure out, I have to confess. And it's been quite an object lesson because Symphony number 25 is one of the most formally curious of all of the Haydn symphonies. Why? Well, it has three movements. There's no slow movement. The central movement is a minuet. And then it has a zippy finale. But the first movement consists of a big, slow thing. And I'm not calling it an introduction because it's not an introduction. It's a slow thing attached to a fast thing. And how do we come to grips with the slow thing attached to the fast thing? The slow thing is long enough. It's more than 2 minutes long. It's about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And in a movement that's only 5 and a bit minutes long, the whole symphony is only 12 minutes long, a slow thing of 2 and a bit minutes is an independent movement. It really is. It's a bifurcated movement. Now, we've heard one of these before. Haydn has done this before. And there are certain very, very famous works in the classical period that exploit the possibilities of these bifurcated movements. Mozart's Prague Symphony is one of them. That's one that is a big, long, slow thing at the beginning, and then a quick movement attached to it. One of the most famous is Beethoven's Seventh, which of course has an enormously long, slow thing attached to the much more famous fast thing. And later on in the Romantic period, one of the most famous examples is Brahms' First Symphony. And we know that this bifurcation was intentional. I don't mean intentional in the sense that, of course it's intentional. He wrote it. But what I mean is that there was some sort of the way we call it, bifurcated, is legitimate because Brahms originally began that movement with the Allegro. There was no slow thing. And so he added a slow thing. And it's much more than just an introduction because these slow things have their own independent form, their own shape, their own purpose, their own melodic material. Yes, they may be related motivically to the quick thing that comes after the slow thing. But even so, they are independent slow things. But this particular slow thing, and we see that Haydn was the guy who invented the slow thing attached to the fast thing. He also invented fast things attached to slow things. We'll get to some of those later. But this is really, really a fascinating little symphony. And the lesson it taught me was, don't think too hard about the music because it will only steer you wrong. Just let it speak to you. Let it be what it is, because what it is a very puzzling slow thing followed by a perfectly normal sonata allegro fast thing. And what's puzzling about it is Haydn's intention to make it puzzling. If it sounds puzzling, it's because it is puzzling. Why is it puzzling? Well, it's puzzling because what Haydn is doing here, and once you realize it for what it is, everything just becomes clear. The sky's clear, the clouds part, sunlight beams down on you. Yeah, the reason it's puzzling is because Haydn is playing a little game. The game is, what is going to happen next? This is a fascinating little slow thing because the slow thing has no real internal form that's discernible. It's not like an ABA. It's not a sonata movement. It has no internal repeats. It's an ongoing, evolving melody that starts at point A and ends at point B. And it just keeps going that way. You don't know where it's going. You don't know when it's going to stop. And towards the end of it, as you'll hear yourself, it has several pauses and impressive gestures and efforts at at a cadence of some kind that is coming to a permanent point of rest. And none of them work. Haydn keeps trying different strategies to try and give the music some shape and form. Because what he's realized is that if you're going to have a big, long, slow thing, either it's complete in itself or it has to lead to something. But Haydn doesn't want you to know what it's going to lead to, or even if it's going to. He wants you to think it's an independent, slow thing. And so that's what he writes. He writes an independent, slow thing that can't make up its mind how to end. And when it finally does make up its mind, it says, the heck with the slow thing. I'm going to do a regular, quick, symphonic first movement. And off we go. And that's what makes it so much fun. It's that indeterminacy. I mean, that's the word, the indeterminacy of the whole thing that makes it so unique. And we understand after we listen to it and hear how it all goes a couple of times that Haydn is really, really experimenting with creating suspense, with your ability to detect long-term harmonic and tonal and motivic trajectories based on the ongoing progress of music. And this is something that you can't figure out on paper. You have to remember, Haydn had his own orchestra at his disposal at all times. He could literally sit down and say, okay, guys, I want to try this out. Let's see how it works. Let's see how this affects us, whether we understand what it's doing. One of the reasons every one of these symphonies is so much fun is because Haydn had the ability to try things and make sure that they worked. That's one of the reasons I say that these early symphonies aren't immature. They're not the result of composing on paper and not knowing what things are going to sound like. They're the result of really knowing what they're going to sound like and knowing full well what you're doing. So even though the form of this symphony is extremely curious, without a formal slow movement, with a minuet in the middle, with the bifurcated first movement, even though Haydn never did anything quite like it ever again, he knew what he was doing. And so in order to get the most out of it, you just have to listen to it. And it's really fun to listen to. Now, there are certain things that these movements have in common. As always with Haydn, it's not as if the piece is disjointed or there are no connections. One of the things, for example, that these movements have in common, especially the first movement, the finale, is canonic counterpoint. Now, canonic means you just have one part following the other part, a certain distance away. Like row your boat, that's a canon. If you do it that way, a round is a canon, a form of canon. And the very opening of this symphony is a canon between the first and second violins. And in the finale, you're going to hear a lot of that kind of counterpoint. That sort of very simple symphonic counterpoint in two parts, sometimes with a slow part and a fast part underneath or on top. It's something that we've heard before in these Haydn symphonies, and he's used it before to try and bind the movements together. And the fact of the matter is, the slow thing and the fast thing are motivically related in a couple of very subtle ways, but Haydn doesn't want you to hear that. It's a very subconscious thing, so I'm not even going to talk about it. If you hear something, good for you. If not, it doesn't matter. The best way to do this is to play the whole slow thing and then the beginning, the exposition basically of the fast thing. And you'll hear exactly what I mean. The whole point of it is you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know where it's going. That's all we need to know about it. And then you just let it do whatever it's going to do. There is one point I want to make. There is a custom to add continuo parts to early Haydn symphonies. And it's absolutely pointless and unnecessary in my view, 99% of the time anyway. And in this particular symphony and in this particular performance with Symphony of Finlandia under Patrick Galois, which is otherwise very good, one of the reasons I dislike harpsichord continuos is that there is always a tendency from the harpsichordist to futz around, to draw attention to himself or herself, to make something where Haydn wrote nothing. And here is a case in point, because that big final pause between the slow thing and the fast thing, in my view, is completely destroyed by the stupid, useless, unnecessary harpsichord cadenza that this guy goes, tingle, 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 tingle. Who needs that? The whole point is the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. And stuffing a harpsichord cadenza in there does not produce uncertainty. That's my view. And that leads to another point that I wish to make, which is something you will, should think about as listeners generally. Just because people do something in a performance, it doesn't mean they have any clue what the music is really about. I'm not saying that these performers don't, but that means they may not necessarily know what the thing is about at every point. Or you may have very fine playing, excellent rhythm, beautiful balances, but the overall expressive arch or the joke or some of the wider formal concerns, they may not grasp it at all. And this happens all the time in music that we listen to. It happens in performances constantly. You may find performances where certain spots are fabulous and other spots are not. And a lot of conductors, a lot of musicians generally, performers, don't have very strong conceptions of large-scale form. They understand moment by moment what's supposed to happen, but shaping a work whole, seeing it whole, and designing a performance with that in mind, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And trying to hear that is very difficult. It really is. As a critic, it's difficult. As a listener, I'm sure for you it's also difficult because we don't always think about it either, especially if it's a piece we love. We just hear the moments we really like and it sounds fine and it's all jumbling along beautifully. But I want you to hear the slow thing, which is wonderful, by the way. It's thematically, it's so interesting because you keep hearing different episodes with different ideas and you're wondering, where is this going? What is it doing? And as we get closer and closer to the allegro, more things start happening. It tries to stop. There's a sort of big unison statement. There's more efforts to stop. It's wonderful how Haydn really starts to throw uncertainty into the mix and then resolve it all with this lovely, quick, zippy first movement. So let's listen. Let's listen to the slow thing and hear how it leads to the fast thing. Symphony number 25 by the unbelievable Haydn. And again, this is Symphonia Finlandia under Patrick Galois and Naxos. A mostly wonderful performance with this one exception. And I wonder if you agree with me about it. Here it is. All right. So that's basically going to be your first movement. You can follow the quick thing all by yourself. Now, the second movement is a minuet. And the interesting thing about this minuet is that the longest section is not the minuet. The longest section is the trio middle section because it's just wonderful. It's for oboes and horns, solo, with pizzicato strings underneath accompanying them. And I'm going to play you the whole trio with repeats because it's just fabulous. It's so striking. And it's at the smack dab center of the whole symphony, formally. And there's a reason, because it's so striking. And Haydn wants to draw your attention to it. This is your focus as the center point of the symphony. It's just a wonderful, 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 colorful bit of writing. And that's all that's there for. It's there just to entrance you with its fantastic orchestral colors. So here is the trio of the minuet. Wasn't that marvelous? I just love that bit. It's just so much fun to listen to. But the finale is also fascinating because the finale is a finale of a type. And it's a type we've heard before. I mentioned that the outer movements of the symphony, and to a certain extent the minuet, but the outer movements are united by the use of counterpoint, particularly canonic counterpoint. And this finale begins with 4 long notes. And we've heard that before. We heard it in the finale of Symphony number 13. That uses that long 4-note theme that became the long 4-note theme in the finale of Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. Da, 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 da. That is what 13 does. And Haydn has a way of dealing with these things. It's 4 slow notes and then sort of a quick answer. It's a call and response formula that he uses in Symphony number 13. Here is how it sounds in Symphony number 13. I want you to just hear a bit for a second. So that's Symphony number 13. This finale does something rather similar, but not quite, because nothing Haydn does is ever exactly the same. But you have a long 4 notes and then an answer, and that's the thematic substance of the finale. And I'm going to run the whole finale, as usual, without repeats. So I want you to pay attention to how he uses those 4 notes and how he develops contrapuntal interest by juxtaposing musical lines moving at different speeds and in canon with each other. It's quite wonderful, and it makes, as usual with these finales, the perfect ending to this very strangely structured symphony. So here's the entire finale, beginning to end. You noticed what it had in common with Symphony Number 13, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't quite the same, but conceptually it was quite similar. And so this is one of these ideas that you may want to keep in mind, because Haydn will return to it at various points throughout his symphonic oeuvre. Perhaps the last and most famous of them all is the finale of the Drumroll Symphony, number 103, which begins with a horn call and then has the actual thematic material of the movement on top of it. But the concept is right here at the beginning in Symphonies 13 and 25. And there's really not much else you need to know about this particular symphony other than it's a joy to listen to. Like I said, it's only about 12, 13 minutes long with all of its repeats. It's very, very brief and very, very quirky. And quirky is fun sometimes. It works, but it's worth also noting that it was the kind of experiment, I think, that Haydn only felt comfortable doing once. He didn't think there was a way to expand on it and do more with it. This is a one-shot deal. And there may be a reason for that, too. That's something to think about as well. So keep on listening, folks, and thank you for joining me for the Haydn Symphony Crusade. The next one, we're going to start getting to the Sturm und Drang period with the Lamentazione Symphony, the Lamentation, Haydn's first big symphony in a minor key. And that is something very, very special. So I expect all of you to tune in for the next one at least, and tell all your friends, everybody, publicize this. Get one of those skywriting airplanes, since this is Haydn Symphony Crusade. Everyone should be listening to this. Everybody. Thank you, folks. Take care.